What are the most common reasons workers' compensation claims are denied?
Right. So the most common, I guess, is probably where they just say, you didn't have an accident.
Okay.
And we get these calls all the time. What this means is, there has to be a singular identifiable event that occurs. So we see cases all the time where people call and they say, well, I was working over these 2 days and my back just started hurting, or, my whatever it was, my shoulder started killing me, and as I kept working and kept working, it just kept getting worse and worse, and oh my Lord, and by the time, the second day was over, I couldn't work anymore. Well, was there any accident? Was there any time that you can figure out that, there was this one time that I lifted this thing, and no, it just was, repetitive use over, or sometimes people say over many years or over many weeks, and that is not compensable under workers' compensation law. Now, you may have heard of occupational disease cases like asbestosis, hearing loss, carpal tunnel. That's a separate category called occupational disease. But, cases where we're talking about trauma, repetitive trauma, other than something like maybe carpal tunnel, repetitive trauma is generally not compensable. Now, that's one defense that we see a lot. Another defense is what we call a risk of employment. So what this means is, most common scenario is you're walking down a set of stairs at work, and you trip and get hurt. So that's generally not a case. And here's why: because unless there's something that caused you to fall that has something to do with your work environment, that you have no case. So the idea behind that is that the public, me and you, and people just out generally walking around at home or whatever you may be, are equally exposed to the risk of just walking down the stairs, or getting out of a car, or walking across the floor. So it's in Virginia. If your job required you to work, let's say, with greasy stuff, and you got it on the bottom of your shoes,
okay,
you slip because of that, that's a case. That's something else, because that's a risk connected to employment. If the stair was defective, that particular stair had let's say that
broken board.
It was broken, or there's that piece on the stairs that's supposed to be rough. Let's say that thing was all smooth and it was defective or missing. That's a case. If your hands are full of work-related equipment, stuff that you need for work as you're walking down the stairs, and there's so much stuff that you can't hang on to the railing, okay, that's a case.
Okay.
So, but outside of that, if you're just walking down a set of stairs, okay, and there's one more defense I do want to discuss that's very common, and that's the defense of somebody being a subcontractor. We see this all the time. So we see a lot of employers try to get away with this. It's very common. And what they'll do is they'll tell you, oh, well, you're working for us, but you're a subcontractor, so you're not entitled to workers' comp. And why do we see this so often? Well, there's several reasons. First, if you're a subcontractor, the employer doesn't have to pay you payroll taxes. You're not an employee. Another thing is, they're not under obligation. Let's say they have more than 50 of these folks.
Okay.
They don't have to pay anything under the Affordable Care Act. They don't have to pay your health insurance because you're not an employee. So here's the bottom line on that defense, which we see a lot. About 90% of the time, I can tell you it's nonsense.
Okay.
Absolute nonsense. I don't care if your employer had you sign a paper that says that you understood, if you're a subcontractor and not an employee, that you're not entitled to workers' comp benefits. It's not worth the paper it's written on. The big key in this issue is control. Does the employer or the person you're working for control what you do? Okay. Are you told when to show up for the job? Can you be fired? Do you have to follow the rules of the employer? Who provides all the equipment? All right, who provides let's say you're in construction. Are they providing the compressors and all the work equipment and the work trucks and all that, and you just show up with your hand tools? You're an employee. They tell you when you got to be there. I don't care what they tell you. You are an employee because they control what you do. And you'll find in most cases that the folks that the employers call in subcontractors are actually employees. Now, another way to explain it is like this. Think about a painter.
Okay.
Somebody hires. So he's hired by a main contractor or a homeowner. He has his own equipment, brushes, compressors, ladders, everything. And he buys the paint for the job. Maybe he has a work truck that says, I don't know, Jim Smith painting on it, right? And he gives an invoice to the contractor or the homeowner that says, this is what I want for my work. This is how much it's going to cost. Here's the estimate. Here's the, and he comes when he wants. He leaves when he wants. He doesn't have any, he's beholden to nobody except himself. That is a subcontractor.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. Not the person who shows up only when the employer tells him to, and has to follow the rules and has to rely on the employer to provide all the equipment.